so this is where we've got to. So we were creating this blend, and unlike so much in Alias, the way that blend develops, we could spend a lot of time refining it, working with the designer, trying to get this exactly as you wanted it, because it might be that that the designer might want this to blend further back, but I think we're just going to work with what we've got. So I remember we had this curve here that I'd put in, which is sort of related to this curve here on the outer edge, and it's about 15 millimeters different. Whether that matters is to be honest, but bear in mind we haven't aligned this yet. So when we align it, of course, that's going to change this fillet surface, this blend surface here. Now I noticed that I've split this surface here to try and tidy up the CVs a bit, which had quite a good effect down here, not so good here. But one of the issues is that where I've split it, we've got some CVs which don't look great. So I'm going to first of all tidy those up just on that join. And the other thing I noticed, apart from the fact that it's sort of got a zigzag in it, is that this point here seems to have moved in quite a bit. When you compare it with this end where these are fairly equally spaced, I'm not saying that they should be. At this end also, they are fairly equally spaced, those CVs on the, let me just get rid of the CVs on the curve there because that's confusing us. So the CVs on the surface are also fairly equally spaced, so probably these ones ought to be fairly equally spaced as well, something alike those ends. So one way we could tidy that, then working on the surface itself, let's bring in the palette. So I'm going to create a curve here. So I just want to duplicate that curve with no rebuild on. And one of the things in no rebuild is I realized I've got on before is interactive. If you have interactive on, what that means is if I pick on that end there, for example, then it can drag along the surface. So it gives us the ISO palms of the surface. If you don't want that, because in this case, we just want the edge. We only want the edge. We don't want it slightly inside there. We just want the edge. If you take interactive off and click on there, no, it doesn't let me move it around. So it's worth knowing that so that we don't accidentally create curves which aren't quite on the edge. So I'm doing this just so that we can tidy that up. So I'm going to tidy that curve up a bit. And we just do that by eye in this view. So if I go into, I'm going to use slide here. I'm going to put the mouse sensitivity down to 1, and I'm going to move that CV around here. So I'm sliding it down so it keeps the same tangent. The tangency matters very much because we haven't actually aligned it to anything at the minute. I'm going to take the CVs off the surfaces there, and then we just move that around. So I just move that down to, when I move it in X, of course, it's moving all over the place in 3D. I have no idea where it's ending up. The only ones we can really control to any extent is these ones where we can use slide a bit. So I'm just going to slide those around a bit. If we can, if we could rotate that and make it completely straight, it actually looks like in that view, we could actually make that completely straight, and it's, that'll be fine. So we can do that with curve planar, or curve planarize. So the one that we want is view. So a bit like the when we got surface edit, and we can go in there and make the CVs all line up in a straight line. We can do the same thing here. So I just go into there, pick that curve, and hit go, and it straightened up those CVs. Now, like I say, that will have we've moved those CVs around in space somewhere, so they'll, looking at it from that angle, they're not great, but it doesn't matter because we're just using that to try and tidy up these CVs on the surface a bit. So I'm going to do the right hand surface first. I'm going to do an align on there. This isn't going to fix the problem completely, but it'll help a little bit. So I'm going to then align that surface to the curve. Just make sure we're picking the curve. And I want position influence of 1. So in other words, use the same CV values as on the edge. And then we want to blend that. And we're just going to try blending a few rows. We'll blend those 2 rows there, see if it has any effect. It's not great. If I change the blend factor, it's even worse. So 1 is as good as it gets. You can use old, and I think you can go higher. Whether that helps or not is very debatable, and you can see it's not helping at all, really. It sort of spaced them out a bit. It's helped the spacing a bit this way, but it's still rubbish. So I'm going to go into that sort of view again with that. Let's go and just isolate this one surface. So if we look at that edge there, we made that straight in one particular view. Now this edge looks round in that view, but if we rotate it around, there might be a point at which we can make both ends straight. So I'm by rotating it up and down the screen here, I can make that straight in that view and that also straight in that view, which means that the CVs in between ought to be straight in that view as well, probably. So let's just try that. So if we go into surface edit, planarize hull, and I'm doing this view based, much like when we did the curve, and I pick that hull there. And now why is that not doing that? It's probably because it's got history on it. That's why. So because it's got history on it, it's not moving. It's because when I put a line on, I've obviously left the history on. So we can do that one, and that one. And we could also do that one. So that's helped. That's helped tidy them up a little bit. Still the spacing's rubbish here. Now on this end, we're sort of this end is really controlled almost by the surface next to it. So I'm just going to go and align that. I'll take blending off. So let's just, because at the moment those CVs go up and down a little bit there, but maybe we can tidy that up just by aligning it there. So that's made those a little bit better spaced. So I've got position influence of 1, so the CVs are joining up to the CVs on this one, and I've got explicit control on. Not that it shouldn't make any difference, to be honest. It shouldn't be changing anything in this case, but it's just made those more in a straight line. So we've now got just these 2 holes to sort out a bit. So if I go back to the view, I should have kept that view, of course. Let's do that. So let me do that again. So I sort of straighten that up. I'm not bothering to do it too accurately. It's just eyeballing it. So that stays straight until this end is straight here. So what I should have done is I should have gone into construction rather than saving a view. It's always better to save a plane, I think. So if we go plane and view, the reason I would rather save a plane is because if I set that like that, we've now got not just one view, which is what you'd have if you saved a view, but you've got all of the other views essentially, because you can go to any of those views at 90 degrees, which is very useful, or can be very useful. So in that view there, so in our Z direction, if we want to keep these straight in that relative to that plane, so we can only move the points, these CVs, in the Z direction, really. Well, that's not true. We can move them in the Z or the Y direction. That's not true either, really. We can move them in the Z, or we can slide them up and down these points here, if that makes sense. So when I'm tidying these up, we just should bear that in mind. The shape of this will be sorted out when we align it, which we haven't done yet. So I'm just going to, that point there, I can move up and down in Z. So I'm just trying to look at the spacing this way. The fact that that sort of looks like it S's a bit, we shouldn't worry too much about that at the minute. If I go into that view, yeah, so that particular one, we could get away with just moving it in the Y direction as well, slightly, if we wanted to. And this one, So I've moved that in the Z direction. Now, if we look at that other view, I do need to move it over this way a bit. And again, that's a bit weird. I'm going to just move it in the Y direction and then the Z and then the Y, looking at it from this angle. I suppose if we looked at it from that side, that would show us the sort of shape that we might want. So maybe I should just move it around in space. Now this is from this end, this has got G2, so that affects those holes. We don't want to touch those, they look okay anyway. These points here, maybe I should use slide there. If I use slide, then we keep them on the lines that we put them on. And then if we go back into that bottom view, just make sure they're not completely straight, because I wasn't very accurate in setting up this plane, I have to say. But since it's going to change when we align it anyway, I think that's probably close enough. Right, let's try. So we've got a line there. Now we've got history on there, because I put history on the align, which I didn't really want to do, but it doesn't matter. So let's go into object edit. Now this is where it's all going to fall apart, I think. So if I say project, and I'm going to do it in the normal, I could do normal or view. I suppose view would be better, really. And these won't stay on the straight lines that I set up. Not that I set them up properly anyway, but let's just try this, see what we get. And at the moment there's a huge gap of 6 mil there. So I'm using view because then I know at least in that view the CVs stay reasonably nice in their pattern. Now nowhere near in terms of gap, so we're going to have to increase the degree in the other direction. So we're at 0.001, so we should be with 7. That's fine. That gap actually is that 5.8 is actually on this end. I hadn't realised. So we'll do that. So these CVs will probably need tidying up again. So I'm rotating the view slightly. The reason is because I want to look at this surface as normal to the surface as much as possible, because then when I've got view on, it's sort of not going to change the CVs dramatically. If I did it from that angle, for example, and tried to align this to this surface, those CVs would go all over the place. By doing it sort of 90 degrees to that surface, looking at it normal, then we keep those CVs under control more with the view on. So let me go into there. I mean, sometimes, you know, I've put view on there, but sometimes I would put a plane in that view, and then I could use that plane. In fact, let's do that. So if I say plane view again, and I'll put it on that edge somewhere, and we'll set the construction plane there. Now, if I rotate that around, you can see that plane is sort of roughly, it's not perfectly normal at all, but roughly normal to this surface. I mean, if you want to make it completely normal, you can do it with construction planes, because you can say geometry, and then you put a plane on that surface there, and you can see that's normal to it at that particular point. But it's usually not necessary to be that accurate. But if I'm using that plane, now when I do a line, and I said I was going to use plane, well, now I've got a plane set up, I can actually use Z of that plane, and I can see what's happening to it from a different angle rather than just in the view. Because if you're in that view looking down on that plane, you can't tell what these CVs are doing in this other view. So that's another place where planes are really useful. So if I said Z of this plane, in other words, it's going to move the CVs only in the Z direction of that plane, and then I try and align it to that surface, and we can see in this view what that's done. If I put proxy display on, that will show us what was there before. So you got these CVs which looked horrible before. Now actually they look pretty good. They seem to be looking at the pattern and going across that way. They're pretty good. Position wise, we're not 100% there yet, and I'm just trying to work out what that is. It says 0.001, so we're very, very close. Just above our tolerance, and we're working to an incredibly tight tolerance, to be honest. That if you were working on this as a concept model, you wouldn't actually want 0.001. That's more for A class. But I think it's useful to be out working to a tighter tolerance than we need in reality, because then you're learning sort of good practice for how to get those gaps right down when you need to. Now, obviously, we've gone to degree 7, and the reason for not going above degree 7, which we could do, is just that some systems like CATIA, for example, if you read a model into CATIA and it's got like your model's got degree higher than 7, what happens is CATIA reapproximates that surface, so that if you then brought that model back out of CATIA, you'd find it would have multiple spans on here. It might have 50 spans on it or something, just to get the similar tolerance. So the rule in most companies is, degree 7 is the maximum, and then if you can't get what you want with degree 7, then you'd introduce some spans onto it. And certainly for fillets, there's no problem in having spans at all. For block surfaces, there's a bit of a debate on whether you should have everything should be single span, and most of the time you don't need anything above single span. But on fillets, it's no problem, in my opinion. And anyway, increasing the spans. If you've got 100 spans, then that's definitely not right. But if you've got like 2, which we've got here, then that's absolutely fine. So if I want to see where the spans are, I can go into this isopalm display. So I'll click on V there, and you can see there's a line appears there. So in other words, it's the equivalent of having 2 single span surfaces. In fact, you could detach it there and you would have exactly the same surfaces. So that's just showing you the internals. Like I say, you would not want this. If you found you've got to go up to some crazy number here, even 10 would be far too much. If you found that was the case, then there's something wrong somewhere. You shouldn't have to go up that high. 4 or 5 might be acceptable in this area, but the lower the number, the better. So let me just bring the mesh back, because I've lost the mesh, and see if we can compare the two. Okay, so the sections we're getting there, that's interesting. The sections we're getting there through that new surface, it's given us crazy results in a sense, because what it's doing is it's put in X sections, but it's done them relative to this plane, whereas all the others are off at different angles. I don't think on previous versions it's ever done that. It usually will replace all of these as well, but maybe that's just I've never noticed that. But it is something you've got to watch out for. If I put on X aligned now, it uses this plane, not the original plane. It doesn't actually matter because we're just using this comparison. But if you look at those sections that through the surface, the blue versus the data, it's actually quite good, which is good. Not that we're trying to get there 100% at all, but I should put those sections on, shouldn't I? I should keep them on, really, because they're useful to see. I'm going to take the mesh off just so we don't have too much on the screen. So we've sort of tidied up the CVs here. Now, obviously, this end of this surface doesn't align with this. This is where we might have to change this a little bit. I'll have to wait and see, because usually, this is the biggest surface. This is a sort of joining surface between this area. This area where we've just used fillet, we don't want to touch that. This area is a big surface, so this would be the one that you really want to get fixed and then align this one to it. But because that was such a mess, I wanted to sort that out first. But let's see what happens if we try and align this to this end. Usually not the best way to do it. You want the smaller end into the bigger end, but I'm going to see what happens there. So we want to make sure that we've got edge on, not project, otherwise you get curves on the surface on the end, which you don't want. Now if I try and do this to G2, it's probably going to mess up big time. Oh, it's not too bad. It's a lot better than I thought it would be, but you can see these CVs here get pushed outwards here. These ones aren't too bad, but when you look at the pattern going through there, we need this to be smooth. So it does look as though we'll have to modify the big surface here, get that as good as we can, and then we'll realign this back into it. But hopefully that shouldn't change this too much. Okay, so let's go with that. I'll take create history off because we don't want that on. In fact, while I think of it, I'm just going to pick everything and delete history, because I've probably got history on the align there, which I didn't want. You just got to watch out for that, because it can just mess you up. You try and align one thing to it, and you find this has got history on the sides, and you'll go around in circles forever. So I'm going to ignore the continuity here. There seems to be two locators on top of each other, because it says 13 millimeters there in position, which clearly is not the case. And so we want to get rid of that. Maybe that was to the curve. Maybe that was what was going on there. I'll get rid of this curve because we don't want the curve. We just want to see the surfaces now. And I'll take the grid off there. So if we look at, so I'm looking at these holes going through here, first of all. And we'll also take the CVs off that curve so we can see a bit clearer. And so I want these to flow through. You can see this is a bit wobbly here and this one's a bit wobbly here, but it's not too bad. And so let's squash that up in that view. Once again, this is a good place where we can use slide, because although this isn't aligned, we'll just, by doing this, we keep it very much under control, because it's only allowing that CV to move along the line joining those two CVs. Likewise with that one, we can move that one down that way a bit, so the pattern of CVs is reasonable going through there. I'm not going to try and align that in a minute, but what I am going to do, so I mean, we don't have to do this, but I always regret not having set up a plane when I've got a view like this. I always regret, like I did earlier, that I haven't set up a plane with that view. So I'm going to set up a plane on that edge. I'll put it on the edge so that I know it's related to that edge. And now we look at the grid and it's doing that. So if I go into object edit and I can align, and I'm going to use G2 project. Now I can either do it in Z or I can do it in the view. They're the same thing in this case. So there's our view. Z is just coming out of the view, so it'd be exactly the same thing. The beauty of doing it with Z, like I said before, is I could rotate it to another view and see what happens to the surface. So I'm just going to do that. See what happens to that surface when I try and align it. And it says position 0.00128, so we're very, very close. So we should be able to increase the degree a little bit to get the result. And if I go back to that top view, you'll see it's not changed the CVs in that view because I had Z on, and that's the plane I've got there. The beauty of having a plane there is I can go back to that plane and reuse it else, again. So the other one we want to look at now is, let's take the grid off for a minute. I want to look at the CVs going through this way. So again, I'm looking sort of normal to this surface here. I'm just, I could put the plane on a point on that surface, but it'll only be relevant to a point. So I'm trying to look at the whole thing here. And you can see these CVs dip down here. So let me just get rid of these. I don't think I want those planes anymore. Let's get rid of those. So I'll just create a new plane and with view on, and it doesn't matter whether I use the curve or the surface to do that. So now when I put the grid on, Z is going in and out of the view again. And so I now want to move these CVs around so that they flow better. And I can see that this, if I've moved just these points, then it probably dips down a little bit here. So I've got a feeling this point needs to go up here. It just looks like that's what I need to do. So we'll slide those points around. So I'm going to do it on that surface. One thing you do notice on this this plane here, when I went and picked that point there, for example, okay, this plane I'm sure has history on it, and it's worth, and probably that one as well. Well, that one definitely, you can see that, but for some reason that one seems to have lost it. But when you put on planes and you attach it to geometry, it's often got history on. It's not obvious because if you went, I think if I go query edit on it, oh, it does do it. So query edit, you can see it's got history on it. But if I do a plane, so it doesn't always apply. If I do plane world, for example, out here, now do query edit on it. So I'm using the hotkey Q in my case, but I should go into here. Oh, it does allow me to do that. But the problem is if you've got history on, like this one's definitely got history on it. You can see it's the color of that one. That one hasn't. It's all very strange with planes, but what you want to do is often delete the history on those planes, because otherwise it's not super critical here, but it can be that if that plane is attached to a curve, for example, and you change the curve, then the plane changes, and usually you don't want planes changing. It's not a good thing. So I'm going to get rid of that one anyway. This one I think I haven't got history on that. Yeah, so I'm trying to delete the history. I'm using hotkeys here, but delete construction history. It doesn't come up with a message saying it's got history. So for some reason that lost the history, but it did have it at one point. Right, so I'm now going to slide these CVs. So I'm trying to get a nice smooth shape through here. I mean, what you can do sometimes, if you wanted to, is I can see these lines here. If you look at these lines here, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, that one, they all sort of fan out apart from that one. That one looks odd. So that one, actually, we should move that one before we do anything else. So in other words, it's sort of halfway between the angle of that and this one on either side, something like that. What you can do through these sort of areas is, just as a guide, you can set up a curve. So you put a curve in from there to there, for example, and then I increase this degree. It's not a curve that we're going to use specifically for construction, but if I say, let's just move those CVs around. Well, so I'm not quite in the top view there. I can tell I'm not quite in the top view because when I go into there, so I'm moving in X, Y, and Z, and I've got this set up. This is something that's worth knowing as well. If you go into general preferences under modeling, the way I've got this set up is that this in this menu here, it tells me that the left mouse button is letting me move this in the X, Y, and Z direction in general. But when you're on an actual, so when I'm not on a plane, this is what's happening. So I'm by using the left mouse button, it's moving in the X direction. Middle mouse button's the Y direction, and then the right hand mouse is the Z direction. If I go onto the top plane there, though, it changes. So now this is green. Now you can see that that's the left mouse button. So it's actually letting me move it around anywhere I like, which is what I want to do. But it only works when you're absolutely in that top view or in a view like that, and that's because of this menu. You can actually say that you want to force it to be on the left X and Y on the construction plane here. So you say the left is free, which is what I'm doing now in that menu. But if you've got it set up like that, then as long as you're in that view, it'll let you then freely move that point around. But I know when I'm not in the view because it doesn't let me move it around. It just moves in this X direction. So this line here, what I'm trying to do with this curve is just go through sort of a best fit through all of the CVs that we've got on the surface, something like that. And the reason, the only purpose is just this for construction, so I can take the CVs off there. I don't want to look at those. And I'm sort of looking at the shape of that in relation to that. Maybe that needs to go a little bit further. There's no harm in this having higher degree at all. It's just to what happened to my CVs? Come back. So I'm looking at that shape there, and I'm thinking that actually needs to be a bit flatter there. So I'm looking at that as though that was a curve, and this is in relation to it. So I'm just going to use that as a guide. Maybe I should put that on a different layer. And I'll make that red. Just call it guide. Something like that. So this is where I want to, roughly where I want to put the CVs of the surface. You could take that curve there and copy it. I don't know why it popped out of the non-proportional scale, but it did. And then we could stretch that. So if I move that onto that point there, and maybe add a little handle in the middle, just pull that down so it's a bit of a best fit on the CVs we've got there. So I'm particularly looking at that one there, something like that. So I'm looking at that shape, and that shape, and those curves. Maybe I would take these sections off. There's a lot of lines on the screen, aren't there, which are probably confusing. So what I want to do is now move these CVs. You can see why it's important to save these planes, because I might, lose this view, and then I can go back to it easily by selecting that plane again. So let's make that. Save that. Oh, it keeps on popping out of non-proportional scale, which it shouldn't do. That's another thing that's in 2025 that wasn't in previously. So we'll just move these points now. I'm using slide again, just to roughly get them into the right place. I mean, in reality, these are not going to be exactly on these curves, and especially on, if you think about this, where it goes over here, you don't actually want those 3 points exactly on the curve, because they will form more or less a straight line going across there, not a curve. And so the curve's just there to give us a bit of help in visualizing what we're aiming for. I think it's useful from that point of view. But we don't need to be too fanatical about, I'm just going to slow that down a bit, because we're in non-proportional view there. It tends to, it's a bit sensitive in terms of moving these points sometimes, so slowing it down is a good thing. And I'm going to move that one up there. Now I haven't bothered moving the ones on the other side, because they're going to, these are going to be taken care of by aligning into this surface here. It might be worth, no, probably won't be worth doing. I was going to align that with history but probably not worth it at the minute. So this is looking at the CVs in that direction. And they look reasonable, but the CVs going this way look a bit odd. That's going back on itself. Let's just take the non-proportional scaling off and have a look at that. So again, I'm going to slide these. This time I'm going to take put this back to 1, the mouse sensitivity, and we'll just slide those along here so that they form more of a straight line going through here, the first 3 points at least. And then this one, slide it again is useful because it keeps it as close to the original as we can make it, really. These ones look okay going that way. Maybe that one's slightly off. You can go on forever looking at these, to be honest. So now I want to align this surface into the main surface. So I'm going to do that. And because we're in our plane, this plane here, So we can use project, we can use Z, we can rotate the view so we can see it from a different angle so that we can see whether the CVs go completely all over the place, which hopefully they won't. So that's not too bad. And then on this edge, we want to use this plane. So if I go and set CP to there, sorry, I shouldn't do that. I should always use these menus just so that you know what I'm doing. So set CP to there. So we've now got that Z direction. So this is another beauty of planes as opposed to views. I can just go and pick those. I don't have to change the view that I'm in. Whereas if you use view, of course, you've got to change the view. So we'll align that to, I've got that aligned already, it says. I must have done that before, not realized. And when you rotate this in 3D, you can actually see that these CVs don't, they've also got a bit of an S going on through there. And because when you look at it from one view, you can think everything's fine, but it's when you rotate it in 3D, so often you find it's not actually what you thought it was, or quite as good as you thought it was. So we'll try this, what I did before, where I sort of line one edge up. It's not going to be completely straight here, but it's sort of straight-ish. And then if I rotate that down, and we'll do that until the other end becomes straight-ish, which is there. And then we'll use surface edit, planarize hull in that view. And I think I may have explained this before, but just to reiterate, so single is just, I'm going to pick one hull. View based is it's going to form a straight line between that end point and that end point and put all of the CVs on it. And what closest boundary is doing, it's a bit like when we do, you know, if you imagine you've got, supposing this was the line to something, what you'd want to do there is if you were moving the CVs by hand, you'd go and pick that point there and you'd move it along the end tangent, and therefore the alignment wouldn't change too much. And you just go through all of these trying to align them by eye, which you can do. But in the planarize hull menu, what closest boundary is doing is exactly the same thing. It's saying that if there's a boundary right next to us, so next to this hull here, it's going to just move these CVs along those lines so that we don't affect the alignment too much. So I'm using this, it's an approximation, because on this end we haven't got a straight line. On this end we have got a sort of straight line, but this is getting us just a bit closer. It's just tidying up those CVs. So, you know, in reality, these ought to be following that sort of shape a bit, but it's very subtle, the difference. So let's rotate that in 3D. The chances are, you know, the alignment will have gone off. There will be things that will have gone off. So let's bring everything back again and go into grid. And of course, I've done my classic mistake, which is not to put the planes into a particular layer. So I've now lost my planes, which is somewhat annoying. So if I go into construction plane, and this is another reason for naming them actually, is I think it's this one. So I've got it visible there, and I've got that one visible there. So what I'm going to do is, just so that I don't lose them again, if I go into information window, they're on just some random layer, which is actually that layer. So I don't know why they got switched off, to be honest. But if I put them onto this planes layer, that would be a better thing to do. But they're now assigned there, so at least I'll know which layer they're on. Otherwise they can go missing. So we've got that plane there, so let's have a look at that from the top. CVs don't look too bad there. We've lost the, didn't mean to do that. Let me just rotate those around. Now this, when we did this alignment here, so it says the angle's 0.156. When we did this alignment, this is something really important to be aware of, because I see it in a lot of people's models, and even my own models sometimes very easily done, is we've done an alignment here, and we did an align with project. So what that's done is it's created a curve on surface. So if I do another alignment with project and Z on, So I'm going to align that to that surface again. Looks all fine, except that we've now got 2 curves on surface. In fact, it's got 3 curves on surface. So I think I've already made the mistake, because if you remember, I aligned that, forgetting that I'd already aligned it, and I've now ended up with 3 curves on surface. So if we then trim this surface, we don't know which of those curves on surface it's going to use, or whether it's even going to work. So this is why it's so important to get rid of your curves on surface every so often. Just make sure you've only got one, and particularly when you're aligning with project on, it just, you can see it's caught me out there. It's very easily done. Let me get rid of that curve, it's just annoying me. Or put it in, I'll put it in a layer. Don't think I'm ever going to use it, but I'll just call it curves reference. So I'm going to forget what that curves reference means, but they are temporary curves. I think I've got one down there as well. So at some point I'll go through those curves and just delete them all, because I won't know what on earth they are. But it's worth hanging on to, I think. So let's just go and align that. So I'm doing that in the Z direction of that plane. And then again, this has changed because we straightened up all of these CVs a bit in 3D. And so we want to go into construction, set CP to this, and we don't need to go into the view at all. We can just go object edit, align that. And again, I'm just about to make the same mistake again. So there's my curve on surface from last time. I want to delete that. You tend to get a better result if you do a project, because you could think, well, why don't, because you could then use the last curve on surface, and sometimes that's fine. But here, because we've done things quite a bit, I would use project every time. Got a curve down there I don't really need. In fact, I've got several curves there, so I just put those on that one, and these were guide curves there, so we'll get rid of those. Shouldn't need those again. So this looks as though it's flowing a bit better. What we haven't got is alignment here, and we haven't got alignment here. Now we should have, we got curves on surface on these edges, and so now thing we've got to do here is align this to here. So let's go into object edit. So I'm going to align this. This is going to be edge. So this is another place where you've got to be really careful. If you leave project on, you're going to have a curve on surface. It'll either fail, or you'll have a curve on surface on the edge of the other surface, which you don't want. Because if you end up with a curve on surface on this surface here, it's not going to be quite on the edge, and then this will be a trim surface, and you'll trim it back, or you won't trim it back, and you'll end up with a gap, and you wonder why. So we want edge on here. Now I'm going to put history on this, because I might need to just adjust this other surface slightly to get a result here, and see what we get. That's not too bad. It's usually this third hull, which is the curvature one, that's the problem one. So it's actually looking, it actually doesn't look too bad at all. I think I'm going to take create history off and see whether we can just adjust these CVs but not lose the curvature continuity there. Let's see if that's possible. So I want history off to do that. So again, I'm going to use slide here, and I'll keep mass sensitivity of 1 on. This one here, I just want to move that down a little bit here. Because I'm doing slide, it's not changing the surface very much, and therefore the continuity there. It doesn't mean, you know, you could pull this too far, and I'm sure I can break the curvature. There we go. But I've actually gone way beyond where I actually want that to be, so that looks okay. You've got to look at these, everything in 3D, not just in one view, because in that view it looks fine. But if you rotate it around, you see a problem. Maybe that looks a bit close together. You can also, you know, looking down things as well as non-proportional views, another good one. like I say, you could go on forever, you know, refining this. That looks a bit weird going through there, to be honest. It's in once we look at it in 3D there. So maybe I'll just move that point a bit. See, when I do that, that edge one moves because it is the third point from the edge, but by using slide, it's keeping it pretty close to the original. I'm going to take this grid off now. And I'm now going to save this. I mean, having done all of this, you know, we've tidied up the CVs, we've aligned things. I haven't aligned these edges. We've got to go back and do that. Yeah, these planes, I mean, probably in retrospect, I probably should have positioned these planes so that they are useful for that edge and that edge, but one's close enough to be able to use that. It may be, you know, this is so close that probably if we just aligned it and did it normal, it would be okay. Well, and so that's what I'm going to try. So let's just try that. Yeah, it didn't make any difference there. That's good. Seems to be okay. And then this one can be normal as well, but only because it's very, very close. So that's broken the angle there, and that's almost inevitable that that's going to happen. We can try making this G1. So we've only got tangency there, and then just see, I doubt that this is the case, but if you then go to G2, yeah, so we're out in G2, but not by very much. So let's go G2 there, and then we just want to bring this back. This is why you don't want history on, because if I then try and, if I've got history on, in this case anyway, if I've got history on these edges and then I try and align that, you just go around in circles if you're not careful. So this one is very close in angle. I'm just going to see what happens if we try and align that just in tangency and just see if the curvature is still there. It is. So that's nice. Now you notice there's a slight angle there. And also the CV's there. This row, it looks a bit, doesn't look great. So I'm just going to slide that CV. As long as I do it along the end tangent, there's a good chance that that won't affect this end. Because that's such a small angle. Oh, we've lost position there as well. So I need to get rid of those curves on surface once more. This is just typical of the process that you go through. So I'll project that onto that surface normal. I'm just using tangency. Let's see if we've got away with that. Yes, hooray. So although I've only aligned it in tangency, because it was so close before, by correcting the tangency, we've actually got G2, which seems like a miracle, and in a way it is. But it's because we were so close already. So I can see, you know, I hate looking at CVs really, because you just end up constantly wanting to adjust them. So I shouldn't zoom in too closely really. So this one is the tangency one. I've realized that one thing I could change is this position influence actually, which can sometimes have a little bit of an effect. Let's have a look at the curvature on there. I noticed that the tangency's gone off there again. So I think it's probably time to just have a look at whether we can just move this normal. So I'll put it on normal and I'll put lots of mouse sensitivity on. So let's slow it right down. We're so close to having a result here. Now on this, if you're adjusting that, you might get away with just moving one of those or two of those, bearing in mind that those points also affect the curvature that way. That's why you tend to go backwards and forwards, but it's incredibly close. But it's worth putting on, if I go onto the locator and the information window, let's try that again, information window, and we say show comb. And so you have to open up the display. If it's not open up already, put show comb on. You can't see anything at the minute, but we can change the comb scale. So this is G0, G1, G2. So if I change the comb scale to say 100, because it's so small, we'll actually make that 1000. There we go. And we can also, so this is saying that in that area it's 0.05, but actually everywhere else it's below 0.05, which is what our tolerance is by default in our construction settings. But if we set that to 0, then you'll see the full picture. So you see everything. And that can be very useful to understand what the changes are that you're doing. And I can increase the scale to some ridiculous number as well if I wanted to. So it's useful to see that, because when we start to move these CVs around, we'll be able to see whether that works or not. In fact, let's just pick that again. That one there. Yeah, we can't do that. Yeah, so that's okay. So we're looking for 0.005 rather. So let's move a CV. So if I'm moving that CV, it's going to affect the tangency that way, but it's also going to affect the tangency that way. But if it's very small, we might be able to get away with it. So if we're very lucky. So we've actually gone below 0.005. So that's now within tolerance. It's telling us it's not. That's because we've changed the tolerance down. I can also move that point and you can see what effect that's having. So that has quite a dramatic effect. So we might as well move that as much as possible. And then what we now want to do is, if we go and pick that locator again, and we'll change the normal angle back to the tolerance that we're working to, which is 0.05. So it's all gone now. And in fact, you find that the curvature in this case is perfect. Again, it seems like magic, but it's because we were so close that the curvature was unaffected. So I'm now going to save that again, because I don't want to lose that one. And let's just check. So if I pick curve on surface, I should have 4 curves on surface here. So it's worth checking that. So it says four picked curves on surface, so that's good. I'll take the edit points off. I don't really want all of that on. And then I can trim these back now. It's not quite on our target curve, and that was our target curve. But in fact, the relationship that we're really after is between this green and that surface. If we were, if it was A class, we'd have some criteria. We'd probably have some specification of the gap between the two. But as long as that's progressing from one end to the other, it shouldn't be a problem. So if we go measure the curve to surface distance there, so it's the maximum distance is at that end, minimum distance is at that end, and you can see it varies in between. So that's what we want. If it was bigger in the middle, then that would be very odd. It would show that this is too flat in the middle. If it was too, if this was smaller in the middle and this end, then we'd have gone too tight on that surface. So that's about where we want to be. So we've got all of that trimmed back. Let's just delete all our locators. We can keep those planes. I mean, I should name them, but because they're on the edges, you sort of probably don't need to, but I will give them some names here just for the sake of it. So if I just call them edge 1, because I can't think of anything better to call them, edge 2. The chances are I'll never use them again, but if we did need them, at least when we look in our planes menu there, or planes layer rather, so you can open up the layer and see all the objects there. You can switch them on and off. But the fact that they're called edge something means that they're significant. That one called infinite plane, no idea what that is. I think that was that one. Right, that was quite an important plane, and I should have called it something, but I can't think what to call it at the minute. But you can just switch them all on and see whether you think they're relevant, I suppose. So we've got this far. I think this is all aligned here. So one of the things you can do, having got to this point, and I will save it again because paranoid about losing it. I'll get rid of this curve because we didn't really use that one at all. It's just a guide. One of the things you can do here is we could go around and put G2 on every edge using surface connection or continuity, and do that. But the much quicker way, once we've got some things trimmed out, is we can use this thing called check mod. So if I go into check mod, it will find any connections between the surfaces and then report back on them. So it's a big menu, this one, but most of it, fortunately, we don't really need. So we want to check the surfaces. That's what we're after. We want to check the visible surfaces. So you can say all or whatever you want. You can report on the errors. I think there's some previous versions where if you just check on errors, then it will crash Alias. So if you just put all on, that's probably a safer thing to do. Now, these things in here, you don't really need those. You shouldn't, if you've been constructing your surfaces carefully, then multiple knots shouldn't ever happen to you. What that means is that if you, well, multiple knots is where you've got, let me just toggle this, the construction plane here. I'll try and demonstrate multiple knots. It's where you've got, say you've created a curve like this. Obviously we're talking about surfaces, but got to think how to do this actually. Maybe I'll come back to that because that's a whole topic in itself, to be honest. Duplicate geometry. Well, it's worth knowing whether you've got duplicates. So if you've accidentally copied one, so it's saying duplicates within tolerance. So if you had a copy of that surface there within 0.1 of a mil, then it would highlight it. And it will also highlight if you've got like a trimmed version of that, which you've accidentally left in the model. So that's worth having on. There's so many different things in here. Short edges, so any edge less than 0.1 of a mil may be a problem. Tiny spans. Again, if you've built your model carefully, you shouldn't have any of these things. The most important things are these angles down here, this tolerances down here. Now, in previous versions, and I'm pretty certain this is a bug in this version, because if I look in my construction options, I've got, what have I got? So continuity here, G0, 0.001. If you look in here, it's coming up as 0.005, and it's grayed out, which is not right. These values should be the same as this. So this is in 2025. So this to me is a bug. Curvature is correct, 0.1, but the angle's not correct either. So what we've got to do here, and normally you wouldn't have to do this, but you can override these values. These values should be, see, now I've double clicked that and it's come up with the right values, in fact. So that's a bug in the system in 2025, but I don't think it was in 24 or 23. So these are the values that you've got in here, which is what you're after, what you should have. So now if I go in, if it doesn't show up or you want to change them, you can go in here and change those to whatever you want them to be. But if I take those off, in here they're grayed out now, which means that those are the values it's going to use. But we want to know, we really want everything. We want to know G0, G1, G2. So we can now run a check on the whole model. So if I say check, it will go and find these. Now, strangely enough, it says that that is not position aligned, which is a surprise because I'm sure I did that. But so what I'm going to do there is I'm going to delete that. So I don't know quite what happened there. Let me just see if it gives the same answer. If I go into SurfCon G2, no. So obviously I've messed up there. I wonder if I untrim this, and I'm going to pick that curve on surface there. I'm also going to go and pick all of that lot and just get rid of the history if there is any, just to make sure. You notice in 2025, sometimes I've left a menu like this. And if you're thinking, where the heck's the menu gone? Because there's no up and down arrows like there is here where you can open it up. You just click on the top bar and it will reappear. It's because I've usually not closed it down properly. I missed the X. Okay, so this, on this one, I need to get rid of the curve on surface there. I think I've just done that. And then we'll align that again. So I don't know what happened there. Project, I'll do it normal because it should be absolutely spot on. I've presumably just not noticed that said position. I've only got degree 6 this way, so let's make that 7, and it's still not quite right. But it's so close, 0.00106, that I think position influence might change it. Yeah, it's changed it, but the wrong way. So it says it's slightly greater now. The other thing you can try and do is, if it's that close, then there's a good chance that if I use, say, view, then it might work. That if you change the way you're setting it up, or I might use Z of the plane that we had before, it may just be as a subtle difference that it's just enough to knock it into being G2 continuous. So I'm going to save that again. Now, it was worth doing that check because there's an area down there where I haven't got curvature, and I think that's when I put the fillet in there. It was something that was visible in the fillet, and it was just something I didn't correct at the time. So if I want to fix that one, this is a place where instead of going and untrimming this and projecting it again, I'm just going to take the quicker route, which is just to align it in edge to the edge there. But like I say, you don't always want to do that. That doesn't always give you the best results, but hopefully, because it's over such a small area, it'll be fine. What I do want to do is, because if I'm aligning that there, is going to change this surface, it'll change that edge and that edge, because we're changing the first 3 holes. So I do need to check that we're keeping that, and I might as well just put on continuity on all edges there. So this one here, let's go object edit. I mean, I can increase the degree. That would be an easy thing to do if that's necessary. So again, I've got this menu which isn't opened properly. So I'll say G2. I don't want project on. I want to do it on the edge, and it should be a full edge actually, because when I was in the fillet function, we should have a curved surface for each of these surfaces, so it should be a full edge. If it turns out not to be, then I can put partial on, but I'm pretty certain it's a full edge. Yeah, and it's fixed it straight away. I've even got position influence to 0 on. That's something that you can try and mess around with, because you can see the effect on it's moving the CVs up and down there, and that can have an influence. And obviously you've got degree as well. You could just increase the degree if that's not aligning, or because it was on one point, it may just be that you could move a CV to fix that one. So the last thing to do, obviously, this what we've got here, all of these locators here, it's telling us there's no curvature alignment here. That's not a surprise because it's a sharp edge. So there's no, I mean, the fact that it says it's curvature means that it is, or not curvature. And obviously the angle as well, it's saying 36 degrees again. It's not a surprise, it's a sharp edge. And so we need to put a fillet down there, and we need to put a fillet down here, and we need to put a fillet around here. So this is going to be an interesting area. So let's just get rid of all of those locators. So the interesting thing here is that we're going to have a fillet coming around here and into here, and then we're also going to have a fillet going over this edge, which is also a sharp edge, and then the two merge with each other, and that's going to be the tricky little area there. So I think we'll leave that one until Wednesday, and let me just trim that back again.